transport ship Aurora Lance descended through the violet atmosphere of Zaltari 3, its engines humming like a distant storm as it approached the surface of the jungle-covered moon. Captain Elias Monroe stood near the viewport, his breath fogging the glass slightly, eyes locked on the massive spires of black stone rising from the trees, like jagged teeth structures, too symmetrical to be natural and far too ancient to belong to a pre-warp civilization. The mission was simple on paper: a diplomatic first contact with the insectoid Zarnith Empire, a hive-based species rumored to be fierce, proud, and secretive. Yet, from the moment Elias had read the sensor report detailing the strange harmonic signal emanating from this moon one that oddly matched human DNA frequencies, he knew something wasn't right. No one could explain how a signal like that could exist here, so far from Earth. And when the human delegation landed and was met by a silent army of insectoid warriors clad in obsidian armor, tension spiked like static in the air. The warriors didn't speak, only parted silently to reveal a figure, unlike the rest, a towering insectoid with a shimmering silver carapace and a flowing crimson mantle, the Zarnith Queen. Her eyes glowed a soft amber, and her antennae twitched as she scanned the humans, her gaze pausing when it reached Elias. For a moment, no one moved. Elias didn't flinch, though his heartbeat pounded like a drum inside his chest. Then, something impossible happened. The Queen lowered her eyes, stepped forward, and dropped to one knee before him. Gasps echoed behind Elias, and the buzzing murmurs of her guards shifted into shocked silence. The Queen placed one of her clawed hands across her chest in a gesture that looked respectful, reverent. Then she spoke in perfect English, her voice low and echoing. "You have returned, Starforged One." Confused and frozen in place, Elias looked around, but the Queen's compound eyes never left him. His second in command, Lieutenant Rhea, leaned toward him and whispered, "What does she mean? You've never been here." Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. He had never set foot on this moon, never even heard of the Zarnith until a month ago. Yet the Queen continued, standing now and gesturing with her many arms toward the entrance of the hive spire. "Come, the mark of the Starforger has awakened. We have waited long." Inside the massive spire, the air was thick with warmth and the scent of minerals. The walls glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss, and carved into every surface were murals, thousands of them, depicting tall, humanoid beings with glowing symbols on their skin, commanding ships, wielding energy, and standing side by side with insectoid warriors. Elias moved closer to a mural where one of the human-like figures was touching a sphere of light, a spiral-shaped mark glowing on his shoulder. The shape was familiar, too familiar. He slowly pulled aside his jacket and shirt collar, revealing a birthmark on his left shoulder, a perfect spiral, one he'd had since childhood and always dismissed as meaningless. The Queen stepped beside him and pointed to the mural. "It is the same," she said. "Kia, you carried the mark, the same as the first one." Elias felt cold, despite the heat in the room. "What does it mean?" he asked. The Queen turned to him, her expression unreadable but solemn. "It means you are the heir. The blood of the Starforge flows in you." She raised her hand, and the stone wall split open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "You must see the vault," she said. "Only the marked one may enter." Rhea protested, stepping forward, but the Queen gently blocked her. "Only him," she repeated. Elias hesitated, but felt a strange pull in his chest, like a memory that wasn't his urging him onward. "Huh?" He descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing. The air grew cooler and heavier the deeper he went, and eventually the narrow tunnel opened into a massive chamber. In the center stood a monolithic door of silver alloy, untouched by time, with no visible seams. A panel blinked to life as he approached. A voice, not a human, one spoke in a long-dead language, that Elias somehow understood. Its genetic signature recognized. Starforge line confirmed. Welcome, Air. The door opened, revealing a room filled with strange machines, each one humming softly like they were asleep but dreaming. At the back of the room, another mural stretched across the curved wall. It showed a galactic map dotted with hundreds of stars, and in the center, a spiral-shaped glyph identical to the one on his skin. Beneath it, in glowing ancient script, were the words, "A lost heir shall return, bearing the spiral of stars to awaken the slumbering flame." Elias stood there, overwhelmed, as whispers filled the room, mechanical, ancient, and somehow familiar. Something was awakening, something that had waited for him. Above, on the surface, alarms suddenly flared, and distant tremors shook the hive. Rhea's voice crackled through his comms, frantic. "Captain, something's happening in orbit. Something big." Elias turned, the door still open behind him, and the mural glowing brighter. He didn't know who he was anymore, but he knew one thing. This was no ordinary first contact. This was the beginning of something far older and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Back on the surface of Zaltari 3, the ground still trembled faintly beneath Captain Elias Monroe's boots as he emerged from the ancient vault, the air thick with tension and the scent of damp stone clinging to his uniform, while the Queen and her warriors stood in complete silence, watching him like he had just returned from death itself. And though Elias didn't say a word, something in his expression had changed. He no longer looked like just a curious human explorer, but like someone who had glimpsed a truth too big to explain, something buried deep in history and now waking again. Later, in the quiet of the royal guest chamber, built into the hive's high spires, Elias removed his jacket and stared at the strange birthmark on his shoulder, the perfect spiral, glowing faintly now under the dim light, pulsing like a heartbeat, and it felt warm, like it was alive, like it recognized something, even if he didn't. And while the other human delegates whispered in the hallway, trying to understand what had just happened, Elias sat motionless, remembering the machine's voice in the vault that had spoken in a long-dead language he had never studied, but somehow understood, welcoming him as an heir. And as much as he tried to stay calm, questions kept racing through his mind. What exactly was the Starforge lineage, and why? Did an alien queen kneel before him like he was some returning god or lost king? But before he could make sense of it, the queen summoned him again, this time not to a public gathering, but to a sacred chamber inside the heart of the hive, where only rulers were allowed. And though the guards said nothing, Elias could feel their nervousness as they led him through twisting tunnels glowing with soft red light until they reached a heavy stone door carved with strange symbols and opened it to reveal a vast circular hall filled with ancient carvings, statues, and shimmering relics suspended in columns of energy, each item glowing with quiet power and age. The queen waited at the center, and when Elias stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted, as though the relics themselves recognized him. In one of them, a small silver cube floated toward him, turning slowly in the air before stopping inches from his chest, humming softly like it was alive, then gently lowering into his hands. And the queen's voice echoed in the chamber as she said, "That belonged to the first flame bearer, the one who lit the stars and gave our ancestors their minds." And Elias looked down at the cube, feeling its weight not just in his hand, but in his soul, as if it carried the weight of forgotten civilizations. Then the queen gestured toward the murals on the walls, and Elias stepped forward, his eyes widening with each image. They were humans, or people who looked exactly like humans, tall and glowing with strange armor, leading great starships through the void, walking among alien species, teaching, building, and yes, even fighting, their spiral marks shining on their skin and around them. The Zarnath insectoids knelt or stood by their sides, not as slaves or servants, but as loyal allies. It was all too much, too detailed to be coincidence or myth. And yet, the timeline made no sense. How could human-like beings exist here thousands of years before humans left Earth? And as Elias turned to question the queen, she only nodded toward a deeper mural showing a great war, stars breaking apart, and the spiral bearers vanishing into silence, their light fading across the cosmos, and below it were the words carved in ancient Zarnith script: "One shall return in the time of broken harmony to reignite the slumbering flame." And though Elias didn't understand what the slumbering flame really was, the way the queen looked at him made it clear she believed it had already begun. Unsure of what to do, he turned back to the floating cube, and as he gripped it tighter, it suddenly opened, revealing a tiny device inside like a key, perhaps a tool etched with the same spiral mark. In the moment he touched it, a bright pulse of energy surged outward, causing the relics in the room to shiver and hum, the walls to glow brighter and far above, in orbit. Sensors on the human ship recorded a sudden burst of energy that matched no known source, a harmonic echo stretching light years away. Elias stumbled slightly, and the queen caught him, her claws gentle, her voice soft as she whispered, "You are not just a visitor, Elias Monroe. You are the link between what was and what must be." But before he could respond, a sudden rumble shook the chamber, and a Zarnith guard burst in, wings buzzing with alarm, speaking rapidly in their native tongue, until the queen's calm expression turned to one of concern. She turned to Elias and said, "A long dormant gate has opened beyond the sky, and something is listening," which made Elias's blood run cold, because he remembered the vault's last words. The beacon has been triggered, and though no one could confirm what was listening, he had this sickening feeling it wasn't friendly. Later, in the ship's medbay, Elias sat quietly while Rhea scanned the spiral mark now glowing faintly through his shirt. "Okay?" She finally asked the question on everyone's mind. "Captain, do you think we came here by accident?" And Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, thinking about how he had always felt drawn to the stars since he was a child. It's how the spiral birthmark had always given him strange dreams of burning suns and falling cities. And now, standing on the moon, light years from Earth, surrounded by aliens who worshipped a version of humanity he'd never known existed, he began to wonder if the truth wasn't that they found Zaltari by luck, but that something on Zaltari had been calling to him, and now, whatever it was, might have just called out to the rest of the galaxy. Deep beneath the surface of Zaltari 3, where the air grew thin and the light dimmed to a soft blue, Captain Elias Monroe followed the queen and her guards into the lower chambers of the hive spire, each step taking him deeper into silence, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. And though he felt the pulse of the spiral mark on his shoulder growing warmer, he said nothing, unsure whether it was a warning or a sign of awakening. The queen moved gracefully ahead of him, her long limbs barely making a sound against the metal floor. And when they reached a massive stone arch carved with spirals and unknown runes, she turned and whispered, "Here, the past still breathes," then touched the wall gently, causing it to slide open with a low hum that sent dust drifting into the air like ancient memories, revealing a vast chamber bathed in soft silver light, filled with towering machines, huge, quiet, motionless things made of shining alloys and strange dark crystal, some shaped like great mechanical beasts, others like pylons reaching toward the ceiling, their surfaces covered in tiny lights that blinked slowly like a heartbeat lost in time. Elias stepped forward, his breath caught in his throat. For though these machines were clearly ancient, older than anything humans had ever seen, they did not look broken or forgotten. They looked asleep, like they were waiting for something or someone. And as he walked between them, strange symbols began to light up on their surfaces, one by one, in response to his presence. forming patterns that matched the spiral mark he carried, and behind him, the queen and her guards knelt, silently, their antennae bowed low as if in worship, and Elias heard her voice softly say, "They remember you." He stopped in front of the largest structure, a ring-shaped machine covered in glyphs, and as he reached out, held the metal beneath his fingertips grew warm and the entire chamber began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor and walls like the beat of a great sleeping heart. And suddenly, from the center of the ring, a beam of light shot upward and spread out like a dome above them, showing a moving image in the air stars, ships, people, war, all of it playing out in a silent, glowing vision of the past. Elias saw a great fleet of starships with spiral marks on their hulls, moving through the galaxy like guardians, and beside them, the Zarnath warriors fought, allied with others reptilian beings, crystalline life forms, even intelligent clouds of gas. And then, without warning, came the shadow, a black force that spread across the stars like fire in dry grass, consuming everything. And Elias watched as the spiral ships fought to hold it back, sacrificing worlds, locking something away behind walls of energy and space. And finally, before the vision faded, he saw a final act. One of the Starforge stepped into a chamber and activated a beacon, the same one Elias found in the vault. And then the image ended, the light fading, leaving only silence behind. Elias stood frozen, his heart racing, as the queen slowly rose and said, "The flame bearers were not just leaders. They were protectors of the ancient seal. And you, Elias Monroe, are one of their last descendants." And he didn't know what to say, because he wasn't special. He was just a man who had grown up with strange dreams and a mark no one could explain. Yet now, an entire race was treating him like he was a chosen one from legend. And worse, the vision showed that the seal placed over the great threat, the shadow, was breaking. He turned to the queen and asked, "What is the shadow? What did they seal away?" And she answered with a word that didn't translate at first, but then echoed in his mind as one meaning only: destruction. The hollow star. A being or force so powerful it had swallowed galaxies, a mind that fed on life and light, and the ancient alliance had barely contained it, sacrificing themselves to bury it behind a wall of collapsed dimensions, using the flame-bearer's power to keep the prison stable. But now, that power was fading, and the beacon Elias had triggered had not just awakened the machines here, but had sent a signal across the stars, a flare that could be followed. Suddenly, the walls began to glow brighter, and the machines stirred, their slow hum turning into a deeper rumble, and from behind one of the crystal towers, a shape moved, a tall, thin machine with long limbs and a head like a smooth orb. And though it looked alien, it turned toward Elias and spoke in perfect English. Designation confirmed. Starforged lineage active. Command access unlocked. And Elias took a step back, startled, but the machine simply lowered itself into a kneeling posture and projected a hologram of the galaxy, highlighting several blinking points. Ancient outposts, it explained, built to maintain the seal structure. And now, several of them were offline or destroyed, their status marked in red. The machine then projected one last point in flashing orange, Earth. Elias felt the blood drain from his face, realizing that if the hollow star was waking, it would begin by targeting the worlds of the descendants, his world included. Rhea's voice broke through his comms, urgent and shaky, telling him that new objects had appeared on long-range scan ships, hundreds of them forming out of warp space near a dead star system on the edge of known space, too far to attack yet, but moving slowly, as if gathering, and their energy signatures didn't match anything recorded, not even Zarnath tech. Elias looked at the queen, then at the machine, and finally at the spiral on his shoulder, which now glowed steadily like a burning coal. And he knew what he had to do. He had to go to the nearest outpost, one of the flame-bearer stations shown in blue on the map and activate whatever systems remained to restore the seal and possibly learn how to fight the Holostar if it truly returned. The Queen offered a star map encoded with ancient pathways routes faster than anything the current human fleet could navigate, and promised to send a squad of her best warriors to guide him, but warned that the ancient places were not all safe, and some had been abandoned to madness, decay, or worse. Still, Elias didn't hesitate, and soon, aboard the Aurora Lance, he stood in the command deck, surrounded by his crew, who now looked at him with a mix of fear, awe, and trust. And he gave the order to set a course for the ruins of Zareth Prime, the closest outpost marked on the flame-bearer map, even as Rhea whispered, "Captain, if those machines remember you, what else might remember you too?" And in that moment, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, beyond the light of stars, something ancient and hungry had already begun to stir. The journey to Zareth Prime took only hours using the ancient Zarnith star paths, but to Captain Elias Monroe, it felt like days trapped in silence. His thoughts filled with questions and warnings that refused to rest, and though his crew worked quietly around him, checking power systems and scanning space for threats, he could feel their tension grow with each passing moment, especially Rhea, who had been his closest friend since their academy days, and now watched him like he was slowly becoming someone else entirely. The spiral mark on his shoulder had started to pulse more often, glowing faintly through his uniform, and while no one said it out loud, they all saw it. All felt the weight of what it meant. Even the Zarnith warrior escort aboard the Aurora Lance had grown more reverent, speaking less, bowing lower when he passed, and always muttering prayers in their tongue when the mark lit up, like they were afraid it might speak back to them one day. When they arrived at Zareth Prime, they found a world once rich with forest and crystal plains, now turned cold and silent. Its surface cracked from seismic shifts and old weapon fire, its orbit littered with broken satellites and the remnants of battles fought long ago. And the outpost itself, hidden inside a mountain of dark red stone, was sealed shut. Its systems dead, its entrance locked by what looked like melted metal and ash. Elias stood before the massive door, spiral mark burning hot now, and placed his hand against the ancient symbol carved into the surface. And without warning, the door reacted. The stone shook, lights flickered to life, and slowly the mountain opened, revealing a corridor filled with stale air and flickering lights, as if the outpost had been waiting for centuries for one touch to bring it back to life. The team stepped inside, weapons ready, scanning every corner. But the deeper they went, the more it became clear that something terrible had happened. Here the walls were marked with strange, claw-like scrapes, sheens were torn apart, and deep scorch marks lined the floors as though energy weapons had been fired in panic, not battle. And it was Rhea who found the first body, or what was left of one bone's charred black armor melted, and yet the shape of the spiral mark still faintly visible on the breastplate, confirming that the flame bearers had once stood here and fallen. Further inside, they discovered a sealed chamber that opened only when Elias approached, and within was a throne-like seat surrounded by panels and interfaces now lighting up with ancient code. And when Elias sat in the seat, the room came alive, with sound and light, displaying a broken star map and a sequence of memories recordings left by the last commander of Zareth Prime, showing a desperate defense against attackers, not from outside, but from within humans, or something that had once been human, their eyes glowing, their skin cracked and dark like burnt glass, wielding energy blades shaped like inverted spirals, and speaking in broken fragments of flame-bearer language, twisted into threats and curses. And in the final moments of the recording, the commander said one thing before the screen cut to black. The flame was broken from within. We trusted them, and they tore it apart. Silence followed as the crew stared at each other. The meaning sinking in someone had betrayed the flame bearers long ago, and their descendants might still be out there, not just forgotten, but changed, corrupted by whatever force the hollow star represented. And, as if in answer to their thoughts, the base's proximity alarms screamed to life. Flashing red, and Rhea shouted that something had entered the outer perimeter. Several small ships, silent, dark, no comms, no identification, drifting in orbit like predators circling prey. And before they could react, power in the base flickered, lights dimmed, and a cold wind blew through the halls where there should have been none, followed by whispers, faint and distant, but real enough to make the hairs on Elias's neck stand up. Weapons drawn, they moved as a group through the halls, only to be separated when a blast door slammed shut between them, claying off Rhea and Tizanith from Elias and the rest, and the systems refused to respond to commands, ignoring even Elias's voice, as if someone or something else now controlled the base. In the flickering light, Elias and his team saw shapes moving down the far corridor, tall figures with cracked armor, glowing spiral marks reversed and burning like embers, their eyes hollow, their movements stiff but swift, and they attacked without warning, moving like shadows, their blades tearing through walls as they closed in. Lees fired his pulse weapon and struck one of them directly. The thing barely slowed, the energy seeming to feed into its body instead of damaging it. They ran, retreating through twisting halls, and only Elias's mark saved them when one of the ancient lifts activated on its own and carried them to a higher level, sealing the doors behind them just before more of the corrupted ones arrived. Meanwhile, Rhea and the others fought their own desperate battle in the central chamber, using flame charges and barrier grenades to slow the attackers. And in a moment of clarity, Rhea shouted through the comms that the corrupted ones weren't just soldiers, they were former flame bearers, consumed by something, turned into vessels of the hollow star, and now drawn to Ilias's presence like moths to a flame. Elias, breathing hard, realized that the base itself was struggling to fight Damov, its systems only half awake after so many centuries of silence, and he returned to the control chamber, sitting once more in a command seat and placing the small relic cube, the same one he had taken from the Queen's Vaultine, to the center panel, which instantly caused the entire mountain to rumble, power surging as ancient defenses roared back to life, energy shields snapping into place, and turrets descending from ceilings and walls, targeting the corrupted ones with focus blasts that finally slowed them down or vaporized them entirely. In the chaos, Rhea's group managed to reunite with Elias, and together they made their way to the heart of the outpost, crystalline core, pulsing with faint energy, which now flared to life in the presence of Elias's mark, and with a single spoken phrase from him, words he didn't know he knew, but which came from his lips without thought, the entire outpost reconnected to the ancient network, sending a signal across the stars to the remaining flame-bearer stations. And in that moment, Elias saw flashes of other locations, some active, some dark, and one in particular, showing a strange storm of energy moving toward a distant planet that matched Earth's signature. But just as hope rose, a final figure stepped into the core chamber, taller than the others, armored in black stone, its face hidden behind a mask of mirrored glass. And it spoke Ilias's name, not his title, not his role, but his actual name, in a voice full of sorrow and rage, saying, "You are not meant to return." And Elias realized this was not just a corrupted one, it was a former leader, a flame bearer like him, lost to the hollow star, and now bound to destroy what remained. The two stared at each other, and then the figure attacked, faster than the others, its blade striking with echoes of lightning. And Elias fought back, dodging, using the environment, using instinct he never trained for but now remembered, his mark flaring brightly with every strike, and in the end, it was Rhea who bought the final moment of victory, throwing a pulse grenade that blinded the enemy long enough for Elias to strike the core of its armor, cracking it open and sending the corrupted energy spilling out into the floor like liquid shadows which evaporated in the light. Silence returned, and the base sealed once more, now fully awake, its systems humming with power. And Elias stood over the fallen figure, whose mask had cracked open to reveal human features beneath, pale and scarred, whispering one final warning before fading. You cannot hold back the hollow star. Not alone. They are coming for the mark. Later, as they prepared to leave Zereth Prime, Keyless looked out over the surface of the planet from the ship's viewing deck. And for the first time, he felt the weight of the flame, not just as a symbol, but as a responsibility. Knowing now that the true enemy was not just ancient or far away, it was already inside the legacy he carried. And whatever had broken the flame before might try to break it again, and next time, Earth itself could burn if he failed. As the Aurora Lance left Zereth Prime behind, its thrusters slicing through the dark like silver blades, Captain Elias Monroe stood alone in the observation bay, staring into the star-swept void, his mind full of questions and fears. The spiral mark on his shoulder, now glowing with a constant warmth that made sleep difficult and silence dangerous. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes ruined, worlds, screaming voices. The masked face of the fallen flame-bearer who had known his name. And it haunted him not only because of the battle they had survived, but because that enemy had been one of their own. A protector turned destroyer, twisted by the hollow star into something almost impossible to kill. And worse still, there had been sorrow in its voice, like it mourned Elias, even as it struck. Now, the crew worked around the clock, keeping the ship's systems stable and its defenses strong. For everyone on board knew that their mission was no longer exploration, but survival. And as the ancient network reawakened, flame-bearer outposts across the galaxy had begun to stir, some answering the signal Elias had sent, others remaining silent, perhaps too damaged or too corrupted to reply. Hey, and one name kept flashing across the charts, K, marked in amber as a possible last stronghold. K Leron, a world once known as the Beacon Heart, said to be the final training ground of the Flamebearers. Before the collapse, a place lost in myth and time, its location hidden behind ancient encryptions that only responded to Elias's mark. The Queen's Zarna scouts had confirmed its existence through fragmented lore, describing it as a sanctuary of light where the flame's energy had once burned brightest. And so Elias gave the order to head there, hoping that anything remained. Even as Rhea warned that another set of ships had appeared behind them, too far to engage, but definitely tracking. And the shape of their energy was unmistakable Hollowborn, the same dead, silent vessels that had attacked Zereth Prime. Now, following the flame-like shadows, chasing fire, the journey through the void Vela narrow corridor of ancient slip-space gates, hidden between dying stars, was rough, shaking the ship and turning time strange. And more than once, the crew reported seeing things outside the windows that shouldn't have been there, shapes flickering through the blackness, whispering voices caught in the static. And once, even Elias saw a ghostly figure standing in the reflection of the glass, wearing his own face but with hollow eyes, before it vanished, like breath on cold steel. When they emerged, Kael'Run appeared below them. A pearl-blue world wreathed in mist and strange auroras, its surface unbroken by cities or scars. As if untouched by war, yet the sensors picked up massive power signatures hidden deep underground, beneath an ocean surrounded by mountains shaped like curved blades. And the only way down was a narrow landing site on a high cliff that the ship's AI initially refused to approach, citing unknown interference until Elias placed his hand on the control panel and ordered it himself. They landed in silence, the wind blowing with a song-like hum that made the Zarnith warriors whisper that the planet was alive, watching them, judging them. And when Elias stepped onto the soil, the spiral on his shoulder flared, and from the rocks around them, glowing symbols awakened, forming a path toward a towering gate covered in vines and silver stone. Inside, they discovered the Hall of Embers, an enormous chamber filled with statues of long-dead flame-bearers, their poses noble, their armor elegant, their faces forgotten. But when Elias approached the central altar, the statues moved, not to attack, but to kneel, the lights of their eyes flickering to life as the entire room shifted. Walls rotating to reveal a staircase leading down, far below the surface, to a chamber filled with flame that did not burn, a white-blue energy that danced around a crystal structure like wind through leaves. And as Elias stepped forward, the crystal pulsed and spoke not with words, but with memory, showing him images of the final days of the flame-bearers, how they had prepared for a second war they feared they would not survive, how a few among them had chosen exile instead of battle, and how one had broken the code of the flame, betraying their own to serve the hollow star in the hopes of survival, but instead had been consumed, twisted, and reborn as the first shadow. The vision ended with a choice one that Elias now faced again. To either hide the flame away forever and let the hollow consume what it could not find. Or to reignite it and draw the enemy to battle, risking everything but holding true to the oath of the protectors who came before him. And without hesitation, Elias stepped into the crystal fire, his spiral mark flaring so brightly that it covered his entire body in golden light. And in that instant, knowledge rushed into him, not just memories, but techniques, weapon systems, tactics, languages, and more. The inheritance of flame-bearers, long dead now, flowing into his mind and blood, awakening a dormant part of him that had always been there, waiting to be claimed. When he emerged, his armor had changed, not in form, but in glow, marked now by lines of white flame that moved across his chest, and arms like living veins of power. And when he looked at his crew, they didn't speak, they simply stood straighter, as if something in them responded to what he had become. Because Elias was no longer just a man with a mark, he was now a bearer of the flame reborn. And the planet itself responded, releasing weapons, drones, and relics thought lost, bringing them to the surface as if readying for war once more. But as they prepared to leave, the sky darkened not with storm, but with ships, hundreds of them, hollow-born vessels descending in eerie silence. No warning, no message, just darkness and pressure, as if space itself recoiled, and the largest ship, shaped like a cracked moon, sent a single signal to the surface, a voice, low and broken, calling Elias by name and saying, "We remember you, and we remember your fear." And then the attack began, with beams of dark energy striking the cliffs, shaking the mountains, and tearing apart ancient defenses. Elias and the others fought back, using relic weapons and energy fields reawakened by the flame, and the battle turned into chaos, fire against shadow, memory against oblivion, and Elias found himself facing another hollow-bonded warrior, this one faster, more silent, its armor marked, not with inverted spirals, but jagged stars, its blade humming with entropy, and when it spoke, it said, not a name, but a number, 70-2. You were the last, and Elias realized that the hollow knew the names and deaths of every flame-bearer ever born, tracking them across time, and that he truly was the last, the final ember. They fought in the Hall of Statues, each strike shaking the room, until finally Elias used a pulse of pure flame energy to shatter the enemy's blade and drive it back, and in that moment, the crystals throughout the world responded, sending a flare into space that blinded the Hollow Fleet for only a second, but it was enough. The Aurora Lance fired its new ancient cannons, gifted by Kael'Run, destroying 3 enemy ships and allowing the crew to retreat to orbit. And as they broke away, Elias gave the command to activate the planet's fail-safe and ancient fold drive, built into the world's core that would collapse the surrounding space into a maze of energy, sealing Kael'Run away for a time and preventing the Hollow from claiming it. As the drive activated, the Hollow fleet tried to retreat, but several were caught in the collapse, vanishing into folds of burning light. And when silence returned, Elias knew they had bought time, but not much. Back aboard the ship, Rhea approached him quietly and said, "They'll keep coming. You know that, right?" And Elias nodded, because the rise of the flame was not a victory, was a signal, a beacon shining in the dark. And now every remaining hollow-warped enemy would see it and come, driven by hatred, memory, or hunger. And perhaps some of them might even remember who Elias had once been, before he was reborn as something new, not a soldier, not a savior, but the last flame, carrying the hope of a forgotten war. Burning alone in the night, the stars were quiet, but Elias Monroe knew better than to trust silence, for silence in space was only the calm before another strike. And as the Aurora Lance drifted just outside the shattered zone that had once held Kael'Run, its crew worked with grim urgency, patching hull damage, sorting relic tech, and listening to Elias, who now walked among them not as just a captain, but as something more, a living spark of the flame, the last bearer of a forgotten legacy, his body still glowing faintly from the light that refused to leave him. And though the battle against the Hollowborn fleet had been won for now, every soul aboard knew that what came next would not be a battle, but the final storm. Elias spent hours in silence, speaking to the ship's AI, cross-checking old flame-bearer codes with the data they had unlocked from Kael'Run. And what he discovered shook even his steady heart. There was one more site left, hidden deep in the old network, far beyond known space, wrapped in distortions that only a marked air could pierce. And it was not a fortress or a weapon, but something the flame-bearers had called the core of becoming, a final vault not meant for war, but for the ascension of a new flame. A process left unfinished when the war with the Hollow Star had turned so many hopes into ashes. Elias knew that the Hollowborn would sense the activation the moment he reached it, that they would follow with everything they had. But there was no choice left, for he was not just a relic of the past, he was the bridge to whatever came next. And if he failed, there would be no more heirs, no more flame, only darkness. So he gave the order, and the Aurora Lance jumped into the unknown, riding a pulse of flame-born energy that parted the distortions like wind through mist, revealing the hidden system where a single dying star lit a field of floating ruins, all circling a great black structure shaped like a hand reaching upward, its 5 towers glowing faintly as if waiting for something or someone. The moment Elias stepped off the ship, the ground pulsed and the towers began to hum, their ancient cores recognizing him, opening paths that had been sealed for centuries. And as he moved deeper into the vault, visions returned, memories from thousands of years ago of flame-bearers passing the rite, one by one, rising not through force, but through understanding, sacrifice, and purpose. This was not a place for warriors alone, but for leaders, ones who could bear not just the flame, but the burden of carrying it into a world that had forgotten what light even meant. And so Elias faced the trials, one of memory, where he relived every loss he'd suffered and had to stand tall despite it. One of pain, where his mark flared so brightly it seared his skin, and he had to walk through fire without falling. And one of truth, where he was asked by a voice that echoed from the deepest part of his own soul if he would carry the flame even if it meant dying alone, forgotten, hunted by the very people he hoped to save. And, without hesitation, Elias answered yes. And in that moment, the central chamber opened, revealing the flame heart, floating shard of pure energy held between silver roots like a suspended star. And as he reached out, it spoke not with words, but with certainty. In the flame surged into him, not burning, but transforming, filling every part of him with power, memory, and understanding. And when it was done, he collapsed, not from weakness, but because for one moment he had seen everything the past. The hollow stars birthed from a dying mind, twisted by endless war, the fall of the flame bearers, the seeds they had left, scattered in the hope of rebirth. And now, finally, the awakening of the air. He woke with new armor, not forged, but grown, etched with flowing lines of light that moved like rivers under his skin. And when he returned to the surface, the crew bowed him out of duty, but All and Elias simply nodded, for he was no longer just Elias Monroe, but the flame ascended. And already the stars trembled as a massive hollow fleet burst from the edge of the system, the sky cracking with black energy as thousands of ships approached, their leaders sensing that this was the moment they had feared for centuries, the return of the flame, not as a memory, but as a force. The crew prepared for battle, knowing they could not win through strength alone. And Elias stepped forward, raising one hand, and unleashed the flame across space, not a weapon, but a signal calling every hidden node, every slumbering relic, every shard of the old flame-bearer network back to life. And across the galaxy, old worlds woke, forgotten defenders rose, and once dead systems lit up like stars being born again. The hollow struck hard, sending waves of dark drones and twisted warriors, but Elias stood in the center of the battlefield, his body glowing like a small sun, directing flame energy like rivers through the ship's weapons, shielding his allies, igniting enemy ships with a flicker of thought. And the hollow forces began to fall, not because of firepower, right? Because for the first time in ages, they faced not a fleeing memory, but a rising air, unbroken, unwavering, and full of light. Yet the true threat had not yet come, and as the fleet broke apart, the hollow star itself arrived, a black structure the size of a small moon, its surface pulsing like a heartbeat, and inside it, a voice called to Elias, offering peace, warning him of what the flame could become if pushed too far. But he did not listen, for he had already seen the truth. There could be no peace with a thing that fed on endings. And so he flew alone into the heart of the hollow star, carving a path with his flame, fighting shadows that once had faces, memories twisted into claws. And at the center, he faced the last remnant, a creature made of sorrow and betrayal, the very flame bearer who had once broken the oath and become the first shadow. They fought in silence, two legacies colliding, one trying to preserve, the other to destroy. And in the final moment, Elias reached into the heart of his enemy not with fire, but memory showing him what had been lost, what could still be saved. And the shadow hesitated, just long enough for Elias to channel all his flame into the core, purging the hollow's anchor and collapsing the moon-sized ship into a whirl of light. He escaped barely, thrown into the void, but the aurora lance found him, broken but alive. And the hollow star was gone, shattered into pieces across the stars. As the ship limped back toward safe space, Elias stood once more in the observation bay, watching the stars burn brighter than before, and knew that the war was not over, but the path was now open, for the flame had returned. The air had ascended, and humanity, long silent in the great story of the stars, had finally spoken with fire once more.